taking time out to future gaze with us, to reflect, consider, and gaze into the future in conversation today with Professor Melissa Terrace. So thank you, Melissa, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Lovely to be here.
So, folks, grab your lunch and a coffee and tune in as we reflect and discuss and gaze into our future and get into this topic, the future of copyright and AI. As the use of AI accelerates across the creative industries, urgent questions are being asked about authorship, ownership, and fairness. In recent months, Melissa and myself and our academic peers and industry leaders have responded to two key consultations, the House of Lords Inquiry into Creative Tech and Scaling AI, and the Intellectual Property Office's Copyright and AI Review. The latter sparked high-profile campaigns from artists and media organisations, including Kate Bush, who produced a silent album in protest at the proposals, calling on the government to protect creative rights. And then there was the iconic Make It Fair protest alongside. So it's gained great public gaze. In this Future Gaze session, we'll explore the future of AI in the creative sector, how we safeguard the value of creative work, what ethical experimentation looks like, and how we can shape a future where innovation and integrity go hand in hand. I must have been, feeling optimistic that day I wrote that intro. Okay, so Melissa, thank you for joining us. Melissa is Professor of Digital Cultural Heritage within the Institute of Design Informatics at the University of Edinburgh. She is co-director of the CoStar Real-Time Lab. That's our new 6-year partnership led by Abertay University, and university's role is in the AI aspects of developing AI-enabled tools to resolve challenges in virtual production. She's a founding director of Transcribus, an AI-powered platform for text recognition of historical documents. So welcome, Melissa.
Thanks so much, Caroline. Yeah, it's lovely to talk about this. Along the way of everything I've done, I'm also a trained librarian. I used to teach at the library school at UCL, and copyright is at the heart of librarianship. It's about who you're allowed to give information to and how much you're allowed to share it for access. So I come off the back of this with a 15-year kind of interest in copyright and getting the information people need to the right places legally.
Yes.
And so it's really interesting how this is
Yeah.
intersected with this really poor behavior from a lot of the AI tech bros, it has to be said, and ignoring a lot of the frameworks which really do exist and benefit the creative industry. So I
Yeah.
think if anyone's joining us today feeling quite angry about what has happened, that is justified. And I hope that we can talk about some of that today. But I do think there is hope. I do think there has been something that's happened. The government have made a statement and they've done some things. I do see them dialing back about this. So
Yes.
maybe
So
by the end of this, we'll come out
well,
a little
yeah,
bit more hopeful than
let's
just
go
being
through,
angry.
let's go through the journey because it's still moving.
Yeah.
And it started in January with a consultation deadline end of February. We submitted, and then there's been a dialogue before and after. So, and then we're getting to where the government are now. So let's get into it and also what we can do. So I could not deal with this topic when we bring in Future Gaze back after a little break, because it has become a battle over the future of creative industries and their income with our own government, which is not what I was expecting. So, Melissa, could you set the scene and outline for us what the UK government proposed actually in the copyright and AI consultation, just to set the scene for the start of the conversation?
Okay, so I want to take a little step back from even behind that, which was the conversation or the announcement that Keir Starmer made in January, where
Yes.
he was going to start turbocharging AI and drive growth across both sectors, whatever those are, by ensuring protection and payments for right holders and supporting AI developers to innovate responsibly. And he drew from that AI Opportunities Action Plan written by Matt Clifford, which had 50 recommendations about how AI and the government need to work together, and they changed the law to support AI. It's important to note that they didn't mention the creative industries in that document. All they said is that they were going to reform the UK text and data mining regime. So it's
Right.
at least as competitive as the EU. That's interesting in itself because the EU hasn't figured out what it's doing about reform of the text and data mining. So they're saying, oh, the EU is doing this over there. We have to be the same. But the EU is still in a process of discussing what they do about text and data mining. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this space. There's a lot of overclaiming by the government as to what has already been agreed. And when the consultation came out, it ended at the end of February 2025, 10-week consultation. They started to get into the effect that it would have on people. But they said, and the language was very biased, they said that they wanted to make sure there's legal certainty for AI developers and creative industries alike. Note that they're always putting the AI developers first, and they want to make sure there's more licensing of copyright material by AI developers. Again, putting AI developers first. And so this consultation came out. Anyone in the creative industries was rightly angered by it because it came out with the blocks, having listened to a small section of technology and industry who are really wanting to get their hands on material without having to pay for it properly, probably. We've seen what we can maybe get into if we've got time about what's happening in
Yes, of
America
course.
about that. And wanting to override existing copyright legislation to get their hands on it, promising some kind of future growth whilst ignoring the benefit that the creative industries give to the UK economy. And I do think at the heart of this, there's been a misunderstanding or just an ignorance of how important the creative industries are to the UK economy. And why would you undermine a £129 billion a year industry for an unknown future with AI where they don't know
Yes.
what that's going to do for the economy? And my hope is that the kerfuffle about all this has actually made them realise how important the creative industries are.
So I think the consultation laid out some options about how it could go forward. And one of them was an opt-out for creative content. Could you talk a little bit about what that proposal was?
Oh, so opt-out is that somewhere, well, let me take a step back again. Sorry, I'm such an academic. Let me stroke my chin about this. Under UK law at the moment, as soon as you do something creatively, you're covered. You don't need to register it anywhere. You don't need to sign up. There are services that you can log your works with if you think they're going to be make a lot of money. They're costly. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to send yourself anything in an envelope and registered mail, and that's one of the kind of cheap and cheerful ways that people say might be useful. You don't have to do any of that. As soon as you have an idea, as soon as you write it down, as soon as you record anything, it's in copyright. And this idea that you would have to then log it somewhere and opt out of that is a complete change of the copyright system, which has been in place in Britain for the last 100 and odd years, which works for the creative industries. So they're asking people to opt out, which means we have to register things, which means there has to be a database, which means it has to be the creative process needs to have some kind of administration around it, which actually
Yes.
detracts from what it means to be a creative in the first place. And they're saying if you don't opt out, that means they can take your stuff.
Yeah.
I think their feelings about this are quite rightly riding high. There is an idea that this would be theft, and I think under current copyright legislation, it would be.
Yes. So
Um,
that's where the sector came in. The response was incredible. 13,000 responses to that consultation, a very public Make It Fair campaign wrapped around all the newspapers by journalism and magazines across the UK. There was the formation of CRAIC, the Creative Rights in AI Coalition, which might be worth a look. And I think that Zoe's putting links in the chat. There was a pronouncement by Kate Bush with her silent album and her statement on the cover basically saying, do we really want state-sanctioned theft? I'm paraphrasing. Paul McCartney also joined in with UK music. Last week, Dua Lipa joined in. And then on Sunday, Elton John, who's already been angry, really lit the touch paper on Sunday morning with Laura Kuenssberg saying he will fight the UK government in court over them breaking their own laws. And of course, it doesn't just affect music. Filmmaker Baroness Kidron has been fighting the proposal with amendments to promote IP and not degrade it. She also said, partly what you said there, what's the prize? She said in her statement, why sacrifice the creative industries that have delivered so much value to the UK economy and is now worth 123 billion. For what the government said would be a 47 billion AI industry. So why are you sacrificing one for a prize that seems smaller? What is your justification? So I just wondered if you wanted to, to share what points these leading artists and the Baroness are making here.
I think they're trying to do a few things. They're trying to state that, the copyright provisions that we already have are beneficial to artists. Why do we need to change them? They're trying to speak the language that government understands, which is money and economic growth, and explain. I think some folks in the creative industries, or some bits of the creative industries, are very don't want to get into that discussion because it's not the nature of the creative industries to start banging on about economic growth and the part of the economy which is the creative economy. But that is the language that government understands. And if we are starting to say, wait a minute, and put it in their terms, and it becomes part of the public record. I'd just like to say that I worked for a year in policy in the government and at the very start of my career, and 13,000 responses. You normally get 200 responses to a consultation. Any government response, maybe 250 if you were lucky. So the fact that this has had such a huge response is really interesting, and also showing how heated this debate is. So many organizations, so many unions, so many individuals speaking out about this, and the conversation hasn't stopped. So normally you would have a response and people would get all hit up about it, and then we wait for the thing to come out in 6 months or 3 months or however long later. But the conversation is keeping going. And I think that's a really positive sign. It's a really positive sign that some of the richest creatives in the UK are saying, I'm here to fight this fight. And we're going to need, if it gets to the point where this becomes, I don't think it will, but we can get back to that. If it gets to the point that we need someone to take them to court, we need the Elton Johns and the Kate Bushes to come together and go, right, we are appointing this lawyer together and we're putting our money where their mouth is. Most creatives can't afford that. And
Yeah.
you can't afford, when you find out, if you're an author, most authors like earned average, what's the average income for a full-time professional author? Something like £8,000 a year in the UK now. And they can't afford to appoint a lawyer to take on the likes of OpenAI because their books have appeared in an LLM. You just can't afford it. We need the big hitters in the industry to be saying, yep, come on, lads, come on, lasses, it's time. And these and thems, come on together and let's put together. I want to use the word union, doesn't have to be an official union, although we can get back to that and the role of unions in this and the strength and community. But the community had to come together. The Make It Fair protest did that, but there is a benefit to the community coming together and saying, no, we're keeping the conversation happening and it's not going away, even if the government are slightly kicking it down the road. Just now, they've said it'll be about a year until they produce some reports, and the speed of which things are changing is so fast.
I think the two principles that are, well, the 2 points that are being discussed is that the AI companies need the content to train their models on, and then what? And if the models require free creative content to do that, I would question the viability of those businesses in the first place, but I'm sure that point is moot.
Well, I don't think it is. And I think when you have people like Elon Musk saying the world has run out of data for us to train things on, that's just a lie. The thing he's actually saying is the world has run out of free data or data I can scrape without having to pay for it.
Okay.
There's so much data. Like in the University of Edinburgh, Lothian Health Archive, there's a mile of paperwork, a mile of health records that's never been digitized. And you can imagine digitizing all of that would allow AI to do lots of longitudinal studies about healthcare, but somebody would have to pay for that digitization, right? Which makes AI more expensive. So what we're in a bubble just now where all these AI companies have shot out of the blocks, have scraped the internet for whatever they can get for free, and are now complaining that they can't get enough and they need to be able to scrape more. And I think looking at the business models, you're absolutely right. It's unsustainable what they're doing. There's moral ambiguity. I think it's worse than that, actually. It is
Yeah,
theft for a lot of the stuff that they're doing. And yes, I think they should be allowed to scrape or to use data if they pay for it and if there's a relationship between the people that they're taking the stuff from and they don't want to do that. And that's what the fight's about. The fight's about them making money, them being able to disrupt the creative industries and be able to channel the money that comes through into their own coffers and not be able to pay any money back. And I don't think that the
right,
business models are sustainable if
right.
they have to pay for data.
And the second point was, how do creatives make money in in their creative life, in their creative work moving forward, with or without AI companies in the mix? If AI companies are able to scrape their data and recreate work, and the opt-out option creates work. So I'm just wondering, Melissa, you were mentioned this briefly. Is it that the opt-out version would mean that every single item that, say, me as a photographer, is out there, if it is out there, not all my stuff is out there, but say it was, would I need to catalogue everything that's out there and individually find a place where that's registered for AI scraping and opt out of every single image?
We don't know that yet. But what I will say is there is a mechanism by which you can talk about orphan works provided by the government orphan works scheme, which is about from my neck of the woods in cultural heritage and libraries and archives, if you want to digitize something and put it online and you don't know who the copyright holder is, there's a government scheme where you can put that image into the system and go, I want to use this image in an exhibition about the First World War, but I don't know who the copyright owner is. And you can fill out the paperwork for that. It takes about half an hour to fill out the paperwork for each image. It costs £17, I can't remember the exact, but £17.50, something like that for each image to register it. And it doesn't really work. So if that's what they're proposing, something like that, where we as creatives have to put everything that we do into a system like that, which is clunky, time consuming, you put lots of data in, you can't get it out, it's absolutely unworkable. So they haven't said what the mechanism would be. No doubt, this being the modern world, they would give the contract to some commercial provider who would put together a
Ah,
system, Horizon or Oracle or any of the other big ones, who would charge the government £50 million to put together a database, which anyone who could hack a database together could put together for £2.50 if you knew what you were doing. And it wouldn't really work. So I think the whole thing is a misunderstanding. And I see this time and time and time again when I sit on boards. I sit on a lot of boards. I sit on a couple of government expert panels where you have people come in that don't know anything about technology or how it's procured or how it's delivered and go, we'll build an online thing for that. Like, I will you, I will you?
yeah. So, what could a better system than that look like? Say if there is this utopia of a fair balance where people who do want to work with AI could do so, and AI companies could um, work with creative content that has been recognized and rewarded. What would a system actually look like to make that possible?
Well, firstly, I don't think there needs to be any change to the copyright laws from the point of a creative. They're the copyright laws are still lagging behind the digital age. There are aspects of copyright law which do need to be improved. A lot of it is still from the early 1990s before the internet took off. So there are bits and bobs of copyright law that could be doing with a refresh, but not the central tenet, which is that if you're a human who creates something, it belongs to you, right? That's the central tenet, and we need to hold on to that.
Right.
Um, I know that there are startups working in this area. I know that there are people that are trying to build a system where you could sell your stuff to AI folks. So I think what we will see are these smaller companies or some of the larger IT companies are backing them to try and put together these systems where you can go, all right, then you can have my novels, but I will get a residual. And I think thinking about it like we would residuals if you were Phoebe and Friends, and every time Friends gets shown on the telly, you get a check, you know? If people from Friends make quite a lot of money off that and the reruns. it should be exactly the same for anything else that's been reused. And there should be a residual that follows that behind the creative work that goes back and flows back to people.
Hmm.
That would require, though, those few AI companies that we're talking about, and we're only talking about 5 or 6 main players. It would require them to stop sucking in all the money in the universe and start to deal it out again. And that is a completely anathema to what their business model is, which is
Mm.
just to make money and screw people. So we're asking them, seriously, they're it's late stage capitalism. They're really into the only moral thing we have to do is make money for our shareholders. That is late stage capitalism. They're not interested in anybody else. So we're asking them to change their business model. So I'm not sure they will go for that. But that's why we need a government, and that's why we need a democracy, and that's why we need the government to go, that's not good enough. The
Yes,
laws in this country are that humans who create things own that. And if you want to use it,
right.
you have to be able to pay them for
Well,
it.
this is the point that Paul McCartney made in his response to the government. He was saying, myself as a young person wrote a song and made a living. And if you continue, will that happen in the future? And will forget me as an established artist. He was talking about young people
Yeah.
making their living from writing a song. And I'm thinking, whilst this debate goes on, is any theft surreptitiously occurring? How can we
Yeah.
protect our work from being used without permission, credit, or reward? And indeed, how can we assure that if we do want to grant permission for a particular item that we've created to be used by AI companies just because we want to see what it could do? Like Grimes, the artist, has said, I'm happy for AI to do something with my voice on XYZ record. Okay. So how does that conversation even start? So how do we
Mm.
protect ourselves in the meantime? And if we did want to work with AI companies on something as an experiment, how do we do that and get paid for it?
So at the moment, people are protected under UK copyright
Okay.
legislation and EU copyright legislation. We do still have some of the EU laws, but not all,
Hmm.
when it comes to copyright. Um, So as soon as you create something, you are protected. What does that mean? It means you would have to fight in
Right,
court
exactly.
when it comes to it. So that means that we need to be organizing ourselves because we can only fight this. We can only fight the AI companies, um, are the authors, the Writers Guild in America
Right.
are fighting on this. We
Yeah.
need the guilds and the unions to be getting in there. I would advise people, yeah, do what you normally do to make sure that your name's on the thing that you create. Keep things as much as possible without sharing them until at such point you definitely want to share them to the world. I think how open we all are with our stuff has to change a little bit.
Mm,
I think the internet I grew up in from the 1990s was a very trusting place, a very trustworthy place, had a very different set of values. Just now, anything you're putting online will be scraped. It will be scraped, and they're doing it without anyone challenging them.
mm.
And that is their business model. Like, see you in court, who's going to take us to court? So be careful what you put online. Join a union. Although I have to say, yesterday I was looking at some of the artists in advance of this. I was looking at some of the UK artist unions' web pages and seeing what they were saying about AI. Some of them are totally silent, and we need our unions to get their act together about mobilizing people.
Mm.
And I would really like to see, after Elton John's statement on Sunday, I would really like to see a grouping come together. I know there are things that are emerging and going,
Yes.
right, we're all going into this as a class
Yeah, the
action, and
coalition as well.
and
Yeah.
we're a coalition, and rather than it being like 20 different lawsuits or like actually
Yes.
let's get organized.
Right.
So keep your ears to the ground because I think
Well,
this is one that's worth fighting for
that
because
is
it's
interesting because they have taken a step back. I
mm,
think they might have gotten a shock. I don't know.
I hope
But
they
they
have.
might have gotten a shock. They've taken a step back, and you can hear it in some of the rhetoric. They failed on the floor 3 times, so the Baroness is leading a charge. So I'm not sure where we are. I feel like we're almost in this little silent period, and Elton has definitely upped the ante. Um, I'm wondering, they're saying things like, whoa, we want to strike a balance between protecting the creative sector and developing AI. What does a balanced position look like? Can a balanced position deliver a fair outcome? Have you got any thoughts on that, Melissa?
So I've been working in AI for 25 years at this point,
Yeah,
and I do machine learning on old documents. And you need permission from the libraries and archives that own them to put this stuff through the system. And we've built a coalition on all of this.
right.
AI is only a tool. AI is a computing program that does stuff, but it's not inevitable. It's made by humans at the
Yeah,
moment. It's a choice. It's a choice of where you point it and what you extract from. And what I see at the moment is being presented to us is that it's inevitable that generative AI will come and take everybody's stuff. And that
right.
is the language that our government has used at the start of this consultation, because Keir Starmer believed his guy who has drank the Kool-Aid from Silicon Valley.
Yes,
And they are
that's
like,
how it looks.
woohoo, magic beans. This swell of 13,000 responses, that's not 13,000 people, that a lot of those are institutions. So it's more than 13,000 people going, what? I don't think they realized what they were getting into. And what governments tend to do is run these ideas up flagpoles and see if anyone like reacts to that. And this has been a
Mm,
huge reaction.
it has, yeah.
I've forgotten your question now. I'm going off on
I
one.
was
What was your
basically
question?
saying, what do you think a balanced position could look like? The government's trying to say that they want to strike a balance between protecting the creative sector whilst developing AI companies. And I was just wondering, what does a balanced position
So
even look like?
the balance position is that humans need to be remunerated and the AI companies need to respect that.
Yeah,
There's your balance. It doesn't just mean that the AI companies get to choose to do whatever they like. And, thinking about some of the discussions we had like 15 years ago when we were setting up Transcribus as a cross European system for processing documents, it's horrific to see how quickly the ethical dimension of AI has been diluted by a small group of white men who are then taking a sledgehammer to truth, to how we look after truth for posterity, for libraries and archives, for how we treat creatives, and they're just running amok. And I think we need to keep up this pressure on the government that what they're doing, selling this out for magic beans, will have such huge impact
Hmm.
over how many thousands of people work in the creative industries in the UK.
Well, it's
There's
2.3 million.
Yeah, and it's about employment. It's about the chance of making a living. It's about just the joy of creativity and the
Yeah,
human joy. I mean, I'm someone who does, I make pots and I do lino cut. I've never sold anything in my life, but it's a fundamental thing. I think some of the best philosophers of the 20th century, without a song or dance, what are we? So I say thank you for the music and giving it to me. Do you know? Like, really, without a
yeah,
song or dance, what are we? And I think that
yeah,
allowing people to come for this and to mine it and to do it thoughtlessly. I'd be really interested in a lot of the chat recently about, oh, well, Keir Starmer's a lawyer, he doesn't know how to get off the fence. And I think that actually we're suffering from not having leadership, which is looking at the human at the moment and what it means to be human. But that's another philosophical discussion about what it means
yes,
to be human and to be able to create, because machines can't and AI can't. It could be a tool, it could be marvelous, it could be a marvelous tool, but it's only a tool, and we have to be able to choose where it is deployed. And what the government are trying to do, or have tried to do with this, is take away that choice. And that is what makes me angry.
yeah. Um, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next because I feel that that last contribution by a very rich artist who's willing to take them all the way will do to them and their thought process.
Yeah.
So let's change tack slightly. If we look to the near future, because I just really don't know how far in the future we can gaze with this topic. Um, what will these AI companies likely be generating with, let's just say, our creative content? What would AI tech companies actually create once they've trained their models with the work of creatives? What would it even be like? Would it be running alongside the same time as an artist continues to make work? Would the AI generated work using their previous work end up being a replacement? Will people be able to tell the difference? What will people be buying? The AI or just say, or what?
So I'm actually quite hopeful about this. I'm hopeful because I think the business models of the generative AI stuff isn't, if you think about human creativity as being a bell curve, right?
Yeah.
There's the really rubbish stuff down this end. And at that end, there's the candle in the wind by Ellen John. And in the middle, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we do every day in our normal life. It's the middle stuff that the AI companies want to come for. It's the boring references that we write for people and the invoices that we send. They want to get that business so that they can get money. They're not actually in the business of making tools for that bit. So I think a lot of the interest and a lot of the stuff is being used just to replace boring bureaucracy, actually. And that
Mm-hmm.
is their business model and the kind of things that they're selling to institutions like the University of Edinburgh. We have an AI tool that we can use to
Mm.
help speed up that kind of stuff. That is where most of the stuff works. There are companies such as the bigger companies, I won't name them, but who provide things like, photo editing tools that are already engaging with these tools. But
Mm-hmm.
again, a lot of them are they're not necessarily creative. They're about speeding up the boring stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to talk about creative agency at this point. What does it mean for a human to be driving this stuff? Will they have agency? Will they be allowed to have agency? And I would like to see, I know that Katerina Maruzzi at the University of Edinburgh is working on this, working on exactly what control people have over the tools. And I
Yes.
think if you allow people enough control, then it's fine for them to, it's just another set of tools. It's just another array of tools that they can use as long as the human is in the space that they can drive it and use it and to spark and to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Um I I am hopeful that we still will have creatives that are able to use these tools or not, as the case may
Yes,
be.
of course.
But
But
yeah,
I'm also
yeah,
thinking about the ability to recreate a product digitally from in the style of. So
yeah,
already there's one author has said that she saw an ebook available on Amazon in the style of herself. But I
yeah,
never wrote that. And an artist who said there was visual images available for sale as a print, which is ironic, of in the style of her work. She went, I never painted that.
yeah,
And then I think about the Black Mirror episode with Salma Hayek, where the whole thing was digitally created. They recreated her voice, her body, the script was generated, the whole thing. That kind of freaked my box, that episode.
yeah,
So I'm just thinking if they can train and model from the creative content, can they then generate something in the style of, does that then
yeah,
denigrate the product that's actually coming from the artist and fight for the space digitally to sell that product? Will
yeah.
the consumer even know the difference?
And yeah, I think there's a huge digital literacy issue with this, as we would call it in the library sector, about how people know what information they're looking at and how they know whether to trust it or not. And that's one of the saddest things for me is destroying that and destroying any trust and then how it plays in. We haven't talked about disinformation and how it plays into the current political moment because the AI conversation, the generative AI conversation is not separate to the conversation about fascism, right? These are aligned. It's about disinformation. It's about mistruth. It's about using this to change people's mind and to funnel money and power to a small band of people. And we're seeing all these things converge, and it's really, really scary. But to go back to your point, yes, I think that there are already numerous, hundreds, thousands of cases where people are finding out that their work's been ripped off. There are thousands of illustrators that are, especially, I was reading one about some science fiction illustrators that, their stuff has been specifically trained and ripped off and how it's affecting their livelihoods. I think it's disgraceful. And I think we need our governments, plural, and our democracies, plural, to step in and to help the people. And I would like to think that the Labour Party would care about the labour from people. You would
Right.
like to think that, wouldn't you?
Yes. And Paul McCartney said that to the government, you're supposed to be for the people and protecting the people and standing up for them. And so he was very direct to the current
Mm.
government about their position and about, like you say, about making a living from your work. And you'd think those messages would hit a Labour Party in the heart, one would hope, and the conscience. Some great comments in the chat as I'm spotting them as I go along, and they're really, really good. Um, you can ask questions as well, so get ready to do that in the Q&A box. So let's spool forward a bit further. I don't feel very utopian at the moment, so pardon me for not being completely balanced. But what could this look like in, say, 3 to 5 years' time? Say we settle on a balance point. What is the interplay between creative work and AI use at this point? So Grayson Perry spoke out on Sunday as well to say he thinks the early AI experiments in his world, it's visual images that he's mentioning, he said they were interesting, they were hallucinating, it was artistically, challenging. And now he thinks AI is getting better and more realistic, and for him, less artistically interesting. So, I mean, he didn't say it was shit, but he said he's not bothered at the moment. I've heard from a range of creatives across design, advertising, and TV in particular, who are experimenting with it to support their work. So, reproducing a logo correctly or a brand correctly or an item or a product correctly every single time in AI that supports a mood board or a concept proposal, maybe copywriting as a first draft or a TV pitch that's just experimenting and getting spitballing, if you like, with the AI. They haven't taken it further to make the work, just to inspire or get started as a tool. But there's artists who do wish to experiment in creating work in music and sound, in visual, etc., and work with AI companies. So what does that world look like when we do work together? And
I
can we
think
coexist?
I think that's really I think it's really interesting when people make the conscious decision that they're going to use this and they're going to see where it goes and use it like a co-pilot, which is now a brand, to actually go alongside you and to do stuff. And I think artists, a lot of artists, do want to take any tool that comes up and test it and to max it out and to kick the wheels and go, oh, let's see where we can take this or how fast it can go. And I think we will learn a lot from the artists who choose to do that. And we will learn a lot about the affordances, the things you can do, the good things and the bad things with the technology, and we'll learn a lot about the limitations as well from that. So I'm all for that kind of conscious experimentation. But what I would say in 3 to 5 years' time, we're in the golden age of AI right now, right? Where most of us can get access to AI very easily and freely and cheaply. This is flooding the market to disrupt it. And then in a couple of years' time, what they'll do then, when we're all sucked in and become dependent on this, is they'll put the prices up and it will then become ring fenced. And then you'll have a situation where there's a bunch of people that can afford to access the tools, and there'll be a bunch of people who can't. And it becomes a digital divide then as to who gets access to this, who can speed up the boring bureaucracy of being an artist using AI, and who can't, and who can, I think that's something that we need to put on our radars. The free access will not continue because they're all hemorrhaging money. And it's a race to own. It's a race to own the sector. That's what they're doing. Who can get there first, who's like, got market saturation, everyone's using that, and they can start to make money and jack up the prices. Um, and not everyone will be able to afford that. Not everyone will have access. Are we prepared for that two-tier system where some people will be able to draw from the scraping the whole history of humankind and other people will just be left to their own imaginations? even if they want to use AI. And that's coming. The digital inequality always comes. And that's the business model behind these things. It's a loss leader. You allow free access, you swamp the market, you disrupt things. It's the same model that Starbucks used when it came and drove out small cafes. It's the same model that Lyft and Uber used to try and disrupt. You flood the market and then you hike the prices and you've destroyed the infrastructure. So we can't let the infrastructures, the creative infrastructures that we have, be destroyed. We have to make sure that things like Creative Edinburgh are supported. We have to make sure that we maintain our infrastructures and our engagement points as humans, as artists, because in a few years' time, the tide will go out again and we'll be left with the wreckage. And we need to make sure that we can build something as creatives then, or in supporting creatives. So that's really what I think is on the horizon for the next 3 to 5 years, and we've got to be prepared for that. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop people developing their creative skills, which would allow them to, and stop the markets. Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, that's interesting what you're saying there about skills. If people can't see that they can make a living from creating something because there's a competition with an AI generated lookalike or sound-alike, whatever it might be, then they might opt not to study something creative at school. If you combine that with the STEM focus, especially in England, it's not so much here. We like the STEAMed agenda with art and design in the mix, and the multidisciplinary collaboration and innovation that comes from it. But I noticed that English curriculum's not so keen, it seems, in the recent years. So does that mean we'll see a downflow of creative talent coming through into colleges and universities and into the sector, and a reduction in the talent workforce for many things are still requiring humans in the creative industries? Let's face it, it's a human creative process.
Yeah. And let's remind ourselves that not in Scotland, but in England and Wales, the previous UK government cut all funding to arts subjects. And so actually the numbers of students coming through have plummeted because the universities can't afford to run the courses because they don't get any support to run the courses. And this is our second biggest industrial sector in the industrial economy. And the government took the knees out from under it. And that is now playing out after 5, 6 years. And we're seeing the redundancies across the sector, across the higher education sector, particularly in the performing arts and particularly in practicing arts rather than English literature, but things like painting and silversmithing and pottery. And so I think that combined with parents going, oh, I've got a son who's very creative. I've got 3 kids, and one of them is very, very creative, and he's talking about going to art school. He wants to be an illustrator. You're like, oh, like, what do you say as a parent at that point? What do you say about this stuff coming? I want to support him. I want to support, of course I do. I want him to be happy. But that kind of thing, what do you say? Because especially if you know it's coming, and I think a lot of parents are having that conversations going like, will this be a job? And by the time you finish university in 4 or 5 years, will that be
We
a
never
job?
thought this was the case.
Exactly.
If you remember, a few years back now, Nesta created a document on what roles might be replaced by AI and ones that were less likely to be replaced. And animation was the top unlikely to be replaced. And it went all through creative arts that require a creative idea, creative application, imagination, uniqueness. And now I am more worried about that not being, the correct assessment because the dial has changed, and maybe now Nesta might make a different pronouncement. We've got some questions in the chat. Is there anything to be learned from the way Spotify legalized theft? I like your style. That has impacted music. I mean,
Well,
the digitization of music, and then us all getting free music, haha. That undermined the sector. I was there when that was happening, because I'm old. I saw it happening,
yeah.
and I just thought, oh, here we go. And now you get what, 0.03 pence to be streamed when that's where like you said, it's where the audience has gone.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
undermining that traditional model. But I think what happened with because we were both around at the time, Caroline, because we're that old,
Aye,
like the industry didn't move with the technology.
that's right. There's actually a
It,
book on that. It said they were asleep at the wheel.
yeah,
It's called The Self Appetite for Self-Destruction. I've got it on my shelf.
yeah.
And they actually admitted that they just didn't ride the wave at the right time.
And they didn't have, and there were a few
Yeah.
people who were trying to do this. You know, the first person ever to have an MP3 single in the UK, Caroline. Who was that? Do you know? Do you know?
No.
It was Tori Amos.
Oh, of
Anyway,
course.
yes. And but you know, there were some people that were trying because they had big digital fan bases and they were trying to react, but the record companies were like, no, no, don't. And I don't think we can be like that about AI. We can't just pretend it isn't happening. And the music industry pretended for about 10 years that digital didn't exist because they were like, we've been around for 100 years and we have massive business model, which is this is the way it works. And it kind of came up and smacked them in the face. And then Spotify and the like came in and went, here's another way of getting, and they made the crumbling of the existing music industry. We have to be aware that industries can change very quickly and they can disappear within a year or
Yes.
two unless we put checks and balances in place and unless we understand what's
Hmm.
happening. And I think we need our government to be supporting the humans in the mix on all of this.
Yeah, and the other thing that happened with the record industry is amalgamation until you had giant record labels. Another of our audience today has mentioned everything moving to subscription models. Of course, same in film and TV. And that exacerbates the divide of inequity of access. And Photoshop, she's mentioning here, an early adopter of the subscription model. I was devastated by that, I must admit, spending a lot per month to hardly use it because I don't really use it for my photography. Yeah, that's interesting. Money making through subscription.
Yeah, and so
Um,
that's again a business model. That's the recent change in the software
mhm.
services, you know,
Yeah,
software as a service and subscription models. So
yeah,
transcribers has just gone on to that subscription model, so we made that change as well. And it's a
yeah,
way to get steady income and a way
hmm
to know who
yeah,
is, you know. So it's very attractive for from a company perspective because your
yes,
balance sheet looks a bit more stable.
yes, I get
Um,
that.
but at the same
Yeah,
time, this move towards not ever owning anything anymore, and it's part of that bigger conversation about, you know,
yes.
digital culture and do we actually own it? And yeah,
That was interesting you made that point. I remember when Bruce Willis wanted to donate his record collection, including his iTunes record collection, to his daughters as an inheritance. And he discovered that all the work that he had on iTunes that he thought was his record collection, inverted commas, was rented. And he took them to task on that. And it's interesting. He just said, you mean I don't own my record collection? Okay. There's an interesting discussion there about the digital ownership. Another comment here, are AI companies any different to secondhand bookshops or
I
secondhand
I
record
think
shops or eBay?
I think they are.
Interesting.
I think they are because
Yeah.
they're not just selling. Well, they're not just selling things which have been existed and have been produced. They're actively ripping up the books and actively turning them into other things, and then charging people money and saying that they're better than the other stuff in the first place. And yeah,
Mm,
I don't think it's just not just about the media. These are all things about media which exists in the world and can go off and have a life of its own. And this is
yeah.
about the content and this is about reusing the content. So I think it's a
Yeah.
fundamentally different thing.
When there's another comment here from Andrea, when ChatGPT was used to come up with creative business ideas, company names or logos or straplines, for example, who actually owns the copyright to those ideas? I mean, you're sitting there prompting it, but who owns it?
I don't know actually. I don't. It depends on the system and depends on your user agreement. So I don't. I use the one when I'm using it to write my reference letters and all the boring admin that the university wants me to do. You know, I haven't looked at that from
Yeah,
the IP. So I think again, we need to all become a little bit more digitally literate and asking these questions, which are all about licensing, all about ownership, and yeah, that's a really good point, Andrea. I need to do my homework on that one.
Andrea, well done. You caught Melissa out there. Um, is there any other questions? There's a comment here, which is going back a little bit in the dialogue here. It says, I don't think the moral rights dimension of misattribution has been given enough attention. Because
Yeah.
when we were in that discussion point earlier
Yeah.
on,
I
I think
think
that's fair.
I think that's right, but that's late stage capitalism for you. It doesn't care about the moral dimensions. It's just trying to see how we can make more money.
Oh,
And do you know, we are in the final season of late stage capitalism, I think. I'm not sure I would rewatch it, but you know, it is like we're getting to the end of how the 20th century decided to operate itself, and you know, the effect that it's having on the world. We haven't talked about the environmental costs of any of this.
yes.
We haven't talked about the extraction. It's generative AI, which is not all AI. Generative AI is fundamentally extractive and fundamentally doesn't care about people or planet, right? And it is fundamentally something which is taking stuff to allow us to save a wee bit more time and get more stuff done, which is a very capitalist thing about how you can squeeze more labor out of
Well,
yourself.
yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of just taking that point and the 2 points you just made, Ola's actually touched on that. She's saying amongst the 5 to 6 AI tools which are around at the moment, is there one that's more ethical, more considerate? Is it possible to choose more wisely at this point?
Well, it depends what you mean by AI tools.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to transcribers at this point. So we are a business which employs 36 people. We've put 110 million documents of old things through our system and transcribed them for people, for libraries, archives, museums. It is co-owned by 250 different libraries, archives, museums worldwide. We're the first AI company in the world to be set up as a cooperative under European Cooperative Society legislation. And so we couldn't sell out to Google or whatever because we have 250 co-owners. There's 256 now. It is a way of setting up. It's a business model that you can set up. There's a movement towards thinking about these business models behind AI, and I do think it's the business models that are the problem. It's the business models that are driving the lack of ethics or morals. There's the first international conference for AI cooperative governance is happening in Istanbul in November. So a whole bunch of sociologists and people are coming together to talk about how we start sorting this stuff out. But as for the commercial AI tools, what I would be asking, I'd be looking at what they're saying about the environment. I'd be looking at what they're saying about power consumption. I'd be looking at what you say, because a lot of this free AI, you don't own the stuff if you use it, they own the copyright. Do you own the copyright? I'd be looking at this aspect of how much control you have as a creator. And I'm not sure that anyone is actually thinking in these terms about how you
Yes.
would even rank these things on a moral or ethical,
Yes.
and it's about these different compasses and a clash
Mm-hmm.
of values at that point. And
Yeah.
there's a really interesting point. There's probably some nice website someone could set up about
Mm-hmm.
moral use of AI and ranking things that way. I don't think any exists, but I might be wrong on
It
that.
makes me remember that an animation producer was sent a contract saying that they had to sign um, before they made the production that AI was not involved in anything beyond the mood board. I think everyone's worried about the legal framework moving. So by the time an animation is produced, it could be 2 years. Where's the legal position? So they wanted to be just absolutely covered at, moment dot. So I thought that was an interesting legal response. So another couple of questions. Rachel saying, super interesting discussion. I'm glad. That's good because we weren't sure how it was going to go because it's just a movable feast. Are there any accessible guidelines around the opt-out system? Now, there is a summary on the consultation page on the copyright and AI consultation, and I think Zoe posted the consultation at the top of the chat. If you scroll down to the bottom of that page, there's a summary of the opt-out system
But it
proposal.
doesn't
It
exist
doesn't
yet, though,
exist.
right?
Yeah, it's just a proposal. And the second question is there any way to reclaim the ownership of content you've already published online? I mean, you already own it, so what do you mean reclaim it? I suppose you mean if it gets used, how do you reclaim ownership at that point?
Yeah. You would, well,
Yeah.
you own it. You already own it if you created it. If someone else is using it, if it was another artist that used it, then you would contact them and ask them to take it down. If you find out, then there are tools that will help you find out if a text or an image is part of a large model. So you can look up your stuff and see whether or not it's been ingested. There are tools. They don't have complete coverage, but they are pretty good. So then what do? It's up to you whether or not you contact OpenAI or whoever it is and go like, you've stolen my stuff. Will they reply? Probably not. Do you have the money to take them to court? Probably not. So it's at that stage that this living in a nice world where someone's done something wrong and you say, hey, you've done something wrong, and they go, terribly sorry, how can I fix it? That is what is being broken. And that to
Okay.
me is a breaking of a social contract.
Yeah.
Because as humans, if you do something that upsets someone, inadvertently, and someone comes to you and goes, hey, you did this and this was wrong. You go, oh, Jane, sorry, didn't really mean to. But how do I make it better? And the AI companies are not trying to make it better. And that's the fundamental thing at the heart of this. So I'm not sure how we can actually take it on without getting together, without joining up, without being organized, and
Yeah.
without doing this attack led by Sir Elton John, bless him. So yeah, I love that. Let's go into battle with Elton John
Elton at the
and the
front.
front. Yeah.
There's a couple of comments, but we've run out of time. But just quickly, will Gen AI like NFTs turn out to be a fad?
Yes.
And on the NFT point, when it was at World Animation Summit, people were using NFTs to anchor their animated character in a copyright frame in their mind. So I thought that was interesting. They were using NFTs in that sense. Should there be a push for artists to use NFTs as signatures for remuneration through use in training LLMs?
I'm a trained librarian. NFTs are snake oil. Half the NFTs which are being out the past 5 or 6 years, they're all broken because they weren't actually embedded in any digital preservation guidelines whatsoever. Like they've got no infrastructure behind them. It's a nice theoretical construct, but unless you're building an infrastructure, they don't work. And so there was a lot of people selling this stuff, and many people have bought NFTs which no longer work, and they can't even see the digital art that they spent a whole lot of money on. So I don't think NFTs themselves are the solution. But I do think that there might be some kind of way we can use signatures. And photographs that go online from news already have embedded within the JPEG encoding, like who took it and where it is. And you can tell there are ways to put within the encoding of images, within the encoding of music, you can
Mm,
embed signatures and you should be able to follow it through. But it
yeah,
depends if the AI companies want to actually use that to
yes.
remunerate people. And at the
And like you
moment,
say,
they
it needs an
don't.
infrastructure and a system. In fact, we all need this as going forward. So let's see what the government pronounces. So I need to say thank you now to Melissa and to all of you for your comments. Really brilliant stuff in the chat. Everything we've talked about, I hope, has got a link in the chat. Sorry, Zoe. And
Yeah.
um, I just want to say thank you so much, all of you, for a stimulating and passionate discussion. And let's all get behind Elton John, our unions, and the Create Coalition. And thank you to Creative Edinburgh for hosting FutureGaze. And I will be back, I hope, with another one in a few months. Zoe, to
Yes.
whip up on another debate.
Yes, thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you everyone for being here. We really loved having you. It was a super interesting discussion. We've got another event coming up, which is about your practice performing without burnout. So if you're someone who uses your body as a tool to perform, we're going to be speaking to an amazing choreographer and performer on how she handles that on June 3rd. You can expect all the links that were in the chat and the recording to be sent out later this week. And lastly, we are going to Hidden Door Festival. Creative Edinburgh is going to Hidden Door. We're super excited. Tickets are for the launch night, if you're a Creative Edinburgh member, are £18. So if you're interested in coming to the launch and seeing emerging musicians on the Creative Edinburgh stage at Hidden Door, then we'd love to have you, and I'll send all those details out on chat. So thanks again, everyone, for everything. Thank you so much, Melissa. Caroline, you were awesome, and that
Thank
was
you.
super.
Can I just make a little shout
Yes,
out? I just
go for it.
realised 20th of June, Creative Tech Scotland gathering.
Yes,
Um,
very cool.
www.ctsg.scot. I'm not promising the whole thing will be AI. It won't. It will be creatives and creative tech, and there'll be a bit of AI. And so have a look at the program online, see if it floats your boat, and sign up. See you then.
I'll also send that out on chat, so on the email. So don't worry if you can't find it. I will send that later this week.
Thank you
So
so
thanks so
much.
much, everyone.